Well, good evening, and welcome to Community Bible Church for our Apologetics Seminar. I remember the first time I heard that word, I had no idea what it meant. Going into college, I thought it was a class that husbands or would-be husbands would take. And now that I've been married 28 years, I realize it is a class that husbands should take. Well, we're so blessed to have Frank Turek here this evening. Let's try to help everybody that can have a seat get a seat. If you have an open seat next to you, could you raise your hand and actually hold up the number of fingers if you have one seat, if you have two, if you have three. Snowmobilers know how to do this, right? I didn't know why they were doing that. They were doing this and this and this, and I just was doing this all day, just waiting. There's nobody behind me. You did that too? That's great. All right, just keep those up for a minute. And then we do have some overflow seating in the lobby. There are TVs and sound that will be out there as well. And so, man, what a great turnout tonight. So many that care to defend the faith and to know more about the Lord. So we're excited to be able to talk about this tonight and to have Frank here with us. He's going to continue the talk that he started this morning with his next 3 points and then transition into a time of Q&A. And so just so you're aware, and we had this on the screen as well, but this session will be property of his ministry, Cross-Examined. And so it will be recorded. So just know that going in. And we just look forward to a great time this evening. But let's go to the Lord in prayer and ask his blessing. All right, let's pray together. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the time that we had this morning, Lord, to know that truth exists, God. And we know and believe you are the author of truth. You are the creator of all things. And yet, Lord, there's so much more that we can know. And I pray for people that are here tonight, on whatever stage of the journey they are on in the pursuit of truth, in the pursuit of you, God, that we will all learn and grow and take that next step in that eternal journey of knowing you, Lord. We thank you so much for Frank. We pray for your blessing on him tonight. And we thank you that we can gather around together this evening here at the church. In Jesus' name, amen. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Frank Turek.
Thanks, Steve. Ladies and gentlemen, how many were here this morning or were somewhere else at the time? All right, how many of you are here right now? How many don't respond to surveys? All right, how many were not here this morning? Not here at all. Where were you? We can't cover everything we covered this morning, so what I want to do is take 5 minutes, just kind of do an overview of what we covered this morning. This morning, we talked about Petty Officer Michael Monsoor, who actually, as a United States Navy SEAL in September of 2006, dove on a grenade to save his 2 teammates. He was ultimately given the Medal of Honor posthumously by President Bush, and he had a ship named after him, the USS Michael Monsoor, because he actually gave up his life to save the life of his friends. And there's no greater love than that, said Jesus of Nazareth, who went to the cross for us. There's no greater love than to give up your life for your friends. So we asked the question, Michael Monsoor gave up his life to save his friends. Would anyone give up his life to save you? And we said someone already has, Jesus of Nazareth. But many people don't think the story's true. They think it's invented. It's written by religious people. How can you believe it? I asked this morning if anyone's ever seen a resurrection. Nobody said yes. Yet for us to be Christians, we have to believe in something none of us have ever seen. And we said, how rational is that? And then I said there's 4 questions you need to answer to show that Christianity's true, because I think you can show it's true. Does truth exist? Does God exist? Are miracles possible? And is the New Testament telling us the truth? And this morning, we just covered point 1. Does truth exist? So let's review this. We said that whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson. Now, don't blow this, ladies and gentlemen, because this morning you blew it. In fact, let me refresh you as to what he said.
I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
All right, let's try it. I want the truth.
You can't handle it.
All right, you guys are with me then. Very good. And we said there are a lot of people that can't handle the truth. They're saying there's no truth. You got your truth. I got my truth. Well, if that's the case, then Christianity can't be true. And we also said if that's the case, atheism can't be true then if there's no truth. And we also pointed out, however, that there is truth, quite obviously. If there was no truth, you'd never go to school, you'd never read a book, you'd never be able to catch someone in a lie. Of course there's truth. And we talked about a way you can show people there is, especially when they make comments like this. There is no truth. When someone says that, you're going to ask them a question. The question is going to be, is that true? It's self-defeating to say there's no truth. It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. And we said the way that you can identify false statements is to turn the claim on itself. And this morning we went through several of these. People that say, it's true for you but not for me, or there isn't the truth, only my truth, or you ought not judge. We went through all this morning. And those are self-defeating statements. They can't be true. In fact, we summed it up this way. Can everyone see that this statement right here shoots itself? Can everyone see that? That means that relativism and postmodernism are false because they claim it's true that there is no truth. Now, tragically, many of our high schools and just about all of our colleges have bought into the idea that there is no truth. And you're sending your kids there at 50 to 70 grand a year to learn the truth that there is no truth. How sensible is that, ladies and gentlemen? We're going to have to inoculate them before they go to such a place. And so what I want to do now is point out that yes, truth exists. The next question, is it true that God exists? So this is new material. You guys ready to go? All right. This morning we said there are 3 arguments for the existence of God that we're going to talk about. There are more arguments than this, but we only have time to look at 3. So here the 3 are. The first argument for the existence of God is known as the cosmological argument. That's the beginning of the universe. Now, cosmological just is a word that comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. It says if the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. The second argument is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. Telos is a Greek word meaning design or purpose, and it says if there's design in the universe and design in you, life, there must be a designer. Now, these 2 arguments have some scientific evidence behind them. We'll see some of that here in a few minutes. The third argument doesn't have any science behind it. It's more philosophical in nature. Yet it's the argument we've all known since we were very small children. It's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says if there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one, like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, or it's wrong to murder 6 million people in a Holocaust, or it's wrong to rape and murder children, then there has to be a God. Why? Because there is no standard beyond humanity that everybody's obligated to obey. All those things are just a matter of opinion. That's just your opinion against a baby torturer's opinion, your opinion against Hitler's opinion, your opinion against some jihadist's opinion. We know those things aren't just a matter of opinion. If that's the case, there must be a standard beyond us that is righteous, that we're obligated to obey, and that's what we mean by God's nature. If there's no God, nothing's right or wrong. But we know things are right and wrong, so there must be a God. Now, we'll get to that argument later, but we got to start here at the cosmological argument. Now, you got to admit, it was worth coming out here tonight just to see God do that. Did you see that? Some of you have said, I've never seen God move. Oh, really? Check this out. Now, this is the argument that many say points back to the big... Now, I know there are some Christians in here going, Frank, we're Christians and we don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang is so good that even atheistic scientists are admitting it. For example, Stephen Hawking, who was probably the top physicist in the world until he died about 6 years ago. You may not know this, but Hawking was sort of a medical miracle. He got ALS decades ago, and usually ALS kills you in a couple of years. He lived with it for decades. In any event, here's what Hawking said about the beginning. He said, almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. That there was a beginning to space, time, and matter. The question is, what could have caused that? And it wasn't just Hawking who thought this. Agnostic cosmologists like Alexander Vilenkin, who now teaches at Tufts University, said this. He said, with the proof now in place, cosmologists, by the way, a cosmologist is not someone that puts on your makeup, all right? This is somebody that studies the universe. Cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Now, there's a couple interesting words in this quote I want to point out. First is the word proof. It's unusual for scientists to use the word proof. Why? Because science, by definition, is tentative. There's always new information that could come in that could overturn the pre-existing theories. But Vilenkin sees so much evidence pointing toward a beginning that he's willing to call it a proof. Secondly, the word problem. Why is it a problem that there's a cosmic beginning? Because if there's a cosmic beginning to all of nature, whatever caused nature can't be inside of nature, must be outside of nature. There must be something beyond nature. And that's a problem for scientists because many of them say we can only look at causes inside of nature. We'll get to that here in a minute. Now, I'm not going to go through the evidence for this. Why? Number one, we don't have time. Number two, it's all in the book. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, chapter 3. And number three, it's not controversial. Even atheists are admitting it. What is controversial is what caused the universe to come into existence out of nothing. I don't want to show you the scientific evidence for those reasons. We don't have time. But I do want to show you one piece of evidence, regardless of the science, which I think shows beyond any doubt that the universe had a beginning. This is a philosophical reason. It's not going to change when new information comes in. And in order to explain it, we have to look at a timeline. Let's look at this timeline right here. Here's the present. There's yesterday. There's the day before yesterday. There's last week. Here's my question. Can this timeline be infinite into the past? This is the interactive portion of the program. Can it be infinite into the past? No, why not? Why can't it be? You're sounding like Charlie Brown's teacher right now. Wah, 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 wah. There can't be an infinite number of days before today, because if there were an infinite number of days before today, this day never would have arrived. Why? Because if there's an infinite number of days, you'd always have to live another day before you got to today. But today is here, which is pointing out that if the past were infinite, today never would have arrived. You're looking at me like you have intellectual constipation, okay? Just think about this. This is called the Kalam cosmological argument. There had to be a beginning to time. Now, whatever created time must be outside of time, right? Time was created. And if you're outside of time, do you have a beginning? No. If you don't have a beginning, you don't have a cause. So this answers the question, who made God? No one made God. He's outside of time. He's the uncaused first cause. He's not inside of time. He created time. And we'll see the implications of that here in a minute. In fact, let's just jump to the bottom line. If the universe had a beginning, then it must have had a beginner. We've got two options. This is what the evidence affords us. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Now, here's my only question. Which view is more reasonable? Number one or number two? Number one. I was at Texas A&M once, and some atheist said, I think number one is more reasonable. And I said, let's look at number two for a second. Number two says someone created something out of nothing. Now, that's a miracle, right? But at least you got a miracle worker. You got someone. Number one is a miracle with no miracle worker. That's clearly absurd. By the way, do you realize that everyone believes in at least one miracle? Well, Christians believe in the miracle of the beginning of the universe, but we believe in many others too. But atheists believe in at least one miracle. They believe that no one created something out of nothing. Now, which miracle takes more faith to believe? If you're talking about blind faith, it's number one, it's not number two. Now, think about this, ladies and gentlemen. If space, time, and matter really had a beginning out of nothing, which is what the evidence seems to show, whatever created space, time, and matter can't be made of space, time, and matter. In other words, the cause must be outside of space, time, and matter, must transcend space, time, and matter. In other words, the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create. You say, why personal? Because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons make choices. Also, the being would have to be intelligent, to have a mind to make a choice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? God. You say, well, how do you know it's the Christian God, Frank? We don't. Yet, this could be Allah or some other theistic or deistic God. But if we keep going through the evidence and we realize that Jesus actually did rise from the dead, then we can say that the same being that walked out of the tomb 1,991 years ago is the same being in whose divine nature created the universe out of nothing. We haven't gotten there yet, but we have 6 attributes for the first cause of the universe, which suspiciously looks like it could be the God of the Bible. You with me so far? Okay, there's a lot more in the books on that. We got to ask one more question. If there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? In other words, if there is no God, why does anything exist? Why does the universe exist? Why do you exist? Why do electrons exist? Why do the Dallas Cowboys exist? That's evidence of Satan right there. All right, let's move on to the second argument, and that is the design argument, the teleological argument. We're going to spend more time on this. There's 2 aspects to the design argument. The universe appears to be designed, and life appears to be designed. Let's look at the universe first. Scientists have discovered in recent decades that the universe is fine-tuned to support life. That if you were to change any one of a number of factors virtually imperceptibly about our universe or even about our solar system, we wouldn't exist. In fact, even atheists admit this. Again, Stephen Hawking, an atheist, said this about the beginning of the universe, the extreme precision necessary for the universe to come into existence. He said this: if the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million, a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. If the expansion rate from the very beginning was that infinitesimally different, none of us would be here. Now, you can't make any sort of evolutionary argument for this. You can't say, well, maybe the expansion rate evolved by chance, whatever that means, to this particular right speed. Why? Because the expansion rate started from the beginning at the right speed. It's as if somebody just put that speed in there. Seems to me the same being that created space-time and matter is the same being that created the expansion rate to be precisely what it needed to be for this universe to exist. And there are many other factors about our universe right now. For example, if the gravitational force were altered by more than 1 part in 10 to the 40th power compared to the strong nuclear force, we wouldn't exist. What's 1 part in 10 to the 40th power? That's 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. I know, neither can I. Let me give you an illustration. Take the entire North American continent from Central America all the way to Greenland and stack it in dimes all the way to the moon. That's 238,000 miles all the way to the moon. Then do that on 1 billion other North American continents. Take all those dimes, put them all in one huge pile, mark 1 dime red, mix it in, blindfold a friend, throw them on that pile, ask him to pick 1 dime at random. The chance he would pick that 1 marked red dime is 1 chance in 10 to the 40th power. Is he going to pick that dime? You got to have a lot of faith to believe that. No, look, either this value was designed or it wasn't. What makes more sense? It was designed. You say, what about chance? Ladies and gentlemen, is chance a cause? Does chance cause things? Who caused this? Chance. He was just here. No. Chance is not a cause. Chance is a word we use to describe mathematical possibilities. Chance doesn't do a thing. When scientists use the word chance, you know what they really mean? We don't know. Look, this appears to be designed. And this is just a couple of at least about a dozen of these about our universe. Change any one of them, imperceptibly, we don't exist. You could say the same thing about our solar system. There's about 100 characteristics about our solar system that if you were to change any of them, we wouldn't exist either. For example, let's take a look at our solar system here for a second. There we are, a third rock from the sun. If we were just a little bit closer to, or a little bit further away, we couldn't survive. A little bit closer to, we'd burn up. A little bit further away, we'd freeze. We are what scientists call the Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. It is... That's a lie. It's way too cold here in the winter. Come on. The axial tilt, 23.5 degrees. Change that slightly, we don't exist. Earth rotation, 24 hours. Change that slightly, we don't exist. The size and distance of the moon from us. Change that slightly, we don't exist. If Jupiter here was not in its current orbit, we couldn't exist here on Earth. Why? What does Jupiter do for us? Yes, Jupiter's gravitational force is so strong that it attracts most of the meteors and space junk to it rather than us. It's a cosmic vacuum cleaner. In fact, if you take a close-up look at Jupiter, you see these dark marks here? Those dark marks are comet fragment strikes that are bigger than the Earth. Thank God for Jupiter. Because if Jupiter wasn't there, we wouldn't be here. Saturn does the same thing. In fact, you want to see the size of the planets? Here they are in size order. You got Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Earth. Look at poor Pluto down here. You know, Pluto recently has been demoted as a planet. I don't know about you, but I think it's size discrimination. And what if Pluto identifies as a planet? What then, you bigots? Take a look at this. You can hardly see Pluto. Take a look at this. That's Arcturus. That's another star in our galaxy. Here's the sun over here. Jupiter is 1 pixel on this scale. Earth is invisible. Pluto? Forget about it. All right, keep an eye on Arcturus over here now. Where's Arcturus now? See it way over here to the right? To the right of Regal? That's Antares. That's another star in our galaxy. The sun is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Jupiter is invisible. Earth, Pluto, forget about them. In fact, if the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Beetlejuice here. Look, I don't name the stars, all right? If the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Beetlejuice would be 5 or 6 Empire State Buildings high. The heavens are awesome. And these are just stars in our galaxy. These are not stars outside our galaxy. And the average distance between stars in our galaxy is 30 trillion miles. And all that distance is necessary for us to exist safely here on Earth. Now, how far is 30 trillion miles? Far. It'll take you at least 2 tanks of gas in a Toyota Prius to go 30 trillion miles. A number of years ago, my wife and I took our sons to the Desert Museum in Tucson, Arizona. If you ever get to go to the Desert Museum on the south side of Tucson, if you go out there at night, on a clear night, you can see thousands of stars in the sky. So we're out there one night. This is like in the 1990s, and he said, wow, it's so clear tonight that if we come out here at 9:03, we will see the space shuttle in orbit. Remember we used to have a space shuttle, used to go orbit us and all? I said, oh, come on, we're not going to see the space shuttle. It's only 120 feet long. It's 350 miles up. Oh, me of little faith. At 9:03, the guide goes, look! And we look up in the sky. About 70 degrees above the horizon, there's an object streaking across the western desert sky relative to us about like this. I mean, it's really cooking. When it got right about here, it disappeared. I don't know whether Scotty beamed it up or what. Actually, what happened was, despite the fact that we were in total darkness, the space shuttle was so high up that the sun was still reflecting off of it. And when it got out of the range of the sun, we couldn't see it anymore. Now, when the space shuttle was in orbit, the space shuttle was traveling at about 18,000 miles an hour. That's 5 miles per second. You got trouble getting to work in the morning? Take the space shuttle. 5 miles a second. Think about how fast that is. Well, I did a little calculation and try and figure out how long would it take us if we could get in the space shuttle and go from our star, the sun, to another star in our galaxy, an average distance away, 30 trillion miles. In other words, how long would it take us to go 30 trillion miles if we could go 5 miles per second? How long do you think it would take us? A long time. You must be a math major. Yeah. It would take us 201,450 years. That means if you got in the space shuttle at the time of Christ and started traveling from our star, the sun, to another star in our galaxy, an average distance away, you've been going 5 miles a second for 2,000 years, you would be less than 1/100th of the way there right now. And we're going to explore space. No, we're not. We're not going anywhere in space. We can hardly get out of our solar system. It took us 9 years to get to Pluto. I mean, keep in mind, if our solar system was the size of a quarter, with the sun in the middle and Pluto on the outer rim, you know what the next nearest star is? It's 2 football fields away. We're not going anywhere in space. I mean, it's just too far and too dangerous. Even if we could go light speed, 186,000 miles per second, it would take us almost 4 years to get to the next nearest star. That's unbelievable when you think about it. Let's say we figure out light speed. Let's say we do get to another planetary system at some point. Now, what I'm about to show you is a little bit disturbing, but you guys can handle it. I'm going to show it to you anyway. Let's imagine we get to this other planetary system. We land on a planet, we plant our flag, and then this happens. Beans are not for astronauts, ladies and gentlemen. Now, to show you how analytical my wife is, when I first showed her that video, she smiled just a little bit, and then she said, "That's illogical. There's no sound in space." Now, notice what the psalmist says about God's love and the heavens. Psalm 103 says, "For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him." Now, how high are the heavens above the earth? If it'll take us 200,000 years just to go between stars in our galaxy at 5 miles a second, how many stars are out there totally in the whole universe? Well, the Hubble Space Telescope helped us discover that. A number of years ago, they trained the Hubble Space Telescope on 1/26 millionth of the sky. What's 1/26 millionth of the sky? Go outside tonight, put a piece of rice on the end of your finger, hold it up. That piece of rice represents about 1/26 millionth of the sky. So they trained Hubble for like 11 days of exposure time on that spot. What I'm about to show you is what they found. I don't know if you can see this on the screen, but along the bottom here, you see these are mountains right here. This is the southern hemisphere. They put this little composite video together to show you what they found in this one speck of sky. I'm going to show it to you now. There's no audio, it's just video. This is called Hubble Ultra Deep Field. You can Google this, it's in the public domain. Are you ready? Are you ready? All right, here we go. Here's Hubble Ultra Deep Field. You're going to see constellations come up, and then we're going to zoom out to that one little point. What you're looking at are nearly 10,000 galaxies in 1/26 millionth of the sky. Each of these galaxies apparently have billions of stars of their own. If you find 10,000 galaxies in 1/26 millionth of the sky, how many stars are there in the entire universe? The number of stars in the entire universe are about equivalent to the number of grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth times 100,000. And to go from just one star to another star, just in our galaxy, going 5 miles a second, will take you over 200,000 years. Now you know why the Bible says the heavens declare the glory of God. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I never want to hear anyone here at Community Bible Church ever use the word awesome again unless you're talking about God or the heavens. Awesome shot, dude. Awesome shirt, dude. Awesome TikTok video, dude. No! What are you going to say for God if you're throwing awesome around on stuff that ain't awesome? Now, I only showed you the first half of the verse from Psalm 103. Here's the second half of the verse, and before I get to it, if this is meant to communicate the nature of God, and I think it is, the physical universe is meant to communicate the nature of God, then it's communicating that God's nature is infinite. It has no limits. But that's a problem for us. Why? Because if God is infinite, that means he's infinitely just. And if he's infinitely just, we're all in trouble because we've all been unjust. And if he's infinitely just, he has to punish unjust people. But he's also, thankfully, infinitely loving. So what does he do? He doesn't want to punish us. Well, the second half of Psalm 103, verse 11 says this: "For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far as he removed our transgressions from us." How has he removed our transgressions from us? He's punished an innocent substitute in our place. Not because this is arbitrary. You know, people say, well, Jesus is the only way. That's arbitrary. No, it's not arbitrary. That's the only way an infinitely just being can allow unjust creatures like me and you to go unpunished. He's got to punish an innocent substitute in his place, in our place, because then he can remain just and be the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. That's Romans 3:26. That's why Jesus is the only way. There's no other way to reconcile infinite justice and infinite love. It's only reconciled at the cross. Now, when you look at a universe that has stars equivalent to sand grains on 100,000 Earths, and it's going to take you over 200,000 years at 5 miles a second just to go between those stars, does that make you feel insignificant? It shouldn't. Why? Because as amazing as the heavens are, they're not made in the image of God, but you are. In fact, the heavens were made for you. And this is the second part of the design argument. You are designed. Not just the heavens, but you are. This is you in the womb at 11 weeks. Question, is this animal, mineral, vegetable, or human? In fact, let's go back even further than 11 weeks. Let's go all the way back to when your mother and your father got together to conceive you. Have you guys had this talk before? I see some young people in here, so I'll try and be discreet. I also see some older people in here, so I'll try and be discreet as well, just in case you've forgotten how this works. When your mother and your father got together to conceive you, your mother unconsciously perfumed her egg to attract your father, and then your father sent the entire population of the United States, 300 million, soldiers toward your mother's egg. And then there was a race. And you won. Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not special. You beat out 300 million others. You have blown away anything Michael Phelps has done. Now, seeing some of you limp in here earlier makes it hard for me to believe you were the fastest soldier in the gene pool, but you were. Now, your soldier was 20 to 30 times smaller than a grain of salt, yet it contained half of the 3.2 billion letter genome, your software program, your DNA, all the letters in the right order, that makes you you. And your mother's egg, which was about the size of a period at the end of a sentence in an average book, contained the other 3.2 billion letter genome, all the letters in the right order, your software program that makes you you. And when your soldier and your egg came together, a new 100% genetic human being was created. You know, you have not received any more genetic information from this point till right now. Your genetic information has just duplicated itself. In fact, there were only 4 things separating you from adulthood: time, air, water, and food. Those are the same 4 things that separate a 2-year-old from adulthood. Does this have implications on the abortion issue? Yeah, I think it does. We don't kill the 2-year-old. Why do we kill the unborn child in the womb? Genetically, it's the same. You say, wait a minute, Frank. You know, you can't legislate morality. All right, no extra charge for this, ladies and gentlemen. This was the subject of our first book, creatively titled Legislating Morality. All laws legislate morality. Every law declares one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. You can't think of a law that doesn't legislate morality. The only question is whose morality will be legislated. And you know what? I don't want to legislate my morality. I don't want to legislate your morality. I want to legislate the morality. The one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. The one the Apostle Paul said in Romans chapter 2, the Gentiles are not of the law, have the law written on their hearts. Look, if you don't like the morality, you don't have a problem with me. You have a problem with the Creator upon whose nature this morality is derived. Now, somebody will say, well, don't impose your morality on me. This isn't my morality. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong. I didn't make up the fact that abortion's wrong, that mutilating children's wrong, that rape is wrong, that theft is wrong, that men were made for women and women were made for men, and the best way to perpetuate and stabilize society, which is the reason the government's involved in marriage to begin with, is to legally recognize that man-woman relationship over every other relationship. I didn't make any of this stuff up. This isn't my morality. It's not your morality. It just happens to be the morality. Now, if you have a problem with the morality, you don't have a problem with me. You have a problem with the Creator upon whose nature this morality is derived. All right, no extra charge for that. Let's go back to this. From this point till right now, a construction project of astonishing complexity began taking place. Cells began multiplying at a rate of 4,000 cells per second. Brain cells began multiplying at a rate of 100,000 cells per second. For most of you, anyway. Some cells became brain cells, others lung cells, others heart cells. How did they know how to do this? Nobody knows. Some cells went so far across you to become what they needed to become that it would be equivalent to you today walking across the United States alone. And that construction project continues to this very moment. You just made 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million. Knock it off. I mean, are you thinking about this? You're going, wait a minute, Frank, I got to concentrate. New red blood cells coming up. No, this is just happening. How's it happening? Well, Aristotle recognized something 2,400 years ago. Of course, he didn't know anything about blood cells, but he did notice that all of nature is consistently going in a direction. For example, why does an acorn, if it's properly nourished, always go in the direction of becoming an oak tree? Why doesn't it become an elm tree or a birch tree or a seahorse? You say, well, it's programmed to become an oak tree. Yeah, well, who programmed it? And is an acorn conscious? Is an acorn in the ground thinking, all right, what do I have to do to become an oak tree? No, it doesn't have a mind of its own. If it doesn't have a mind of its own, and it doesn't, yet it reliably goes in a direction, there must be an external mind directing it toward an end. That's what Aristotle called the unmoved mover. Thomas Aquinas came along in the 1200s AD and he said, this is going to be my fifth way to argue for God. That all of nature's going in a direction. If it's consistently going in a direction, there must be somebody directing it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, some atheists say, oh, yeah, we've debunked Aristotle and Aquinas. No, they haven't. This is not an argument about a Big Bang God way back when. This is not an historical cause. This is a cause every single second the universe exists because it's reliably going in a direction. If it's reliably going in a direction, there's a mind directing it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why we can do science. Because the universe is orderly. It does the same thing over and over again. Where does order come from? Where does reliability come from? It doesn't come from randomness. In fact, God is to the universe what a band is to music. If a band were up here playing the music, the band would be playing and sustaining the music. What would happen to the music the second the band stopped playing? Music's over. Same thing is true with God. God creates the universe and the natural laws that govern it, and He creates you, and He sustains the universe and the natural laws that govern it, and He sustains you. This is why the Apostle Paul said, in Him we live and move and have our being, and Christ holds all things together. And the writer of Hebrews says God sustains all things by His powerful word. If God were to pull His hand away from the universe, we'd all go out of existence. In fact, Aristotle mistakenly thought the universe was eternal. And he said, you know what? Even if it's eternal, you need this unmoved mover to keep everything going the way it's going. Now, there's much more in the books on this, but we've got to move on to our third argument for the existence of God, and that is the moral argument. And probably the best way to deal with this argument is to start with football. And here's my question. How do you know that your quarterback throwing a touchdown is better than your quarterback throwing a pick six? That's when he throws it to the other team and they take it back for a touchdown. How do you know that? Men, this is a question for you. Not just rules. The purpose. You've got to know the purpose of the game. If there's no purpose of the game, you can't say that the touchdown gets you closer to the purpose and the pick six takes you further away. If there's no purpose, you can only say the plays are different, but you can't say they're good or bad. Now notice, in football, the purpose of the game comes from outside the game. When the game is when two football teams show up, if they show up down at Ford Field to play, when the Lions play somebody, they go down there, the purpose is already established, right? The rules are already established. Where does the purpose come from? It comes from outside the game. The commissioner and the owners get together and the competition gets together and they say, this is the purpose and these are the rules. And every once in a while they change the rules. Why? Because the game is arbitrary. The rules could be different. In fact, just this year they changed the rules that you can't tackle anybody anymore. I don't know if you heard about this, right? Okay, so there's no tackling in football. You may have heard of this, okay? Now, just like in football, that the purpose and the rules come from outside the game, the same thing is true in life. If there's no purpose from outside of this life, then there is no objective right way to live it, and there is no objective wrong way to live it. There's just differences in how you live. But if there is a purpose, then you can say, this is the right way to live, and this is the wrong way to live. Where does that purpose come from? It comes from God. If there's no God, there's no purpose to life, which means there's no right way to live it, no wrong way to live it. In fact, if there is no God, then the Nazis were not wrong. That's just your opinion against the Nazis. In fact, when we brought the Nazis up at the Nuremberg trials, the Nazis said, we were just following orders. And what did we say in the Nuremberg trials? You had a higher duty to disobey immoral orders because there's a standard beyond your government. What's that standard? It's called international law. But Thomas Jefferson called it nature's law. C.S. Lewis called it the moral law. What is it? It's God's nature. If God doesn't exist, you can't say the Nazis were evil. You could just say they were different from the Allies. If there is no God, then there are no human rights. Have you noticed that in our country, we seem to be creating rights every 10 minutes? Do you know if there's no God, there's not only no such thing as a right to abortion, there's no right to life. There's not only no right to same-sex marriage, there's no right to natural marriage. There's not only no trans rights, there's no Christian rights. There's no rights to anything unless God exists. It's just your opinion. In fact, how does our founding document begin in the second paragraph? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were endowed by their government. No, it doesn't say that. Endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And governments are instituted among men to secure these rights. Government doesn't give you rights. Government's just supposed to secure the rights you already have. And what Jefferson and his colleagues said, if the government is not securing the rights of its citizens, the citizens have a right to a new government. And that's what the Declaration of Independence was all about. King George was usurping the rights of the colonists. And they say, we appeal to the supreme judge of the world. Who's that? The UN? No! The supreme judge of the world is God himself. Now, if there is a God, then there's no right to abortion. There's no trans rights. There's no same-sex marriage rights. They go against the design that God has provided. If there is no God, murder, slavery, and racism are not wrong. But we all know those things are wrong. If there is no God, Christians have never done anything wrong. Why is that the case? Because if there's no right, there's no wrong. In fact, if you're a Christian, what's the biggest objection you get from people about Christians? You guys are hypocrites. Now, if somebody says you're a hypocrite, what might you say back? A couple of things. You're right. I am. So, what does that prove? Does it prove there's no God? No, you know what it does? It actually shows there is a God. Because why would hypocrisy be wrong if there was no God? It wouldn't. There'd be nothing wrong with anything. And by the way, I submit to you, everyone's a hypocrite. Nobody lives up to even their own standards. Atheists don't live up to their own standards. What's the point? John Dixon, who is an historian who wrote a great book called Bullies and Saints, where he goes through the history of the church from the beginning and talks about what the church did right and wrong, asks people who have been wronged by the church this question. When somebody plays Beethoven poorly, who do you blame? Who do you blame? You don't blame Beethoven. You blame the player. So when somebody plays Jesus poorly, who do you blame? You don't blame Jesus, you blame the person trying to play Jesus. Newsflash, Christianity is not Christians, Christianity is Jesus. Keep your eyes on Jesus. Christians aren't the standard, Jesus is the standard. And so we do play Jesus poorly, unfortunately, but that just shows we need a Savior. Many years ago, I had a couple of debates with the late Christopher Hitchens. You guys remember who Christopher Hitchens was? He was a brilliant British atheist who sounded more brilliant than he was because he had a British accent. And you can see these debates on our YouTube channel, the Cross-Examine YouTube channel. And Christopher wrote the book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. This is a picture from our second debate in college in New Jersey. And he was basically saying that religious people had done evil things, to which I agreed. I said, Christopher, you're right, we have done evil things, but you're proving our worldview. If we hadn't done evil things, we wouldn't need a Savior. We wouldn't need Jesus. I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but do you know that you can be good or you can get to heaven by being good? Yeah, you can. You just got to be perfect your whole life. Too late for me. How about you? No, we're all fallen. We all need a Savior. And so I said to him, Christopher, I'm a hypocrite. I can't live up to what Jesus told me to live up to. I can't be perfect as my Heavenly Father is perfect. But if I could, I wouldn't need a Savior. And when people say I can't go to church because there's too many hypocrites down there, I always say, come on down, pal. We got room for one more. Yeah, we're all hypocrites. That's why we need a Savior. That's like saying I can't go to the gym because there's too many out-of-shape people there. Well, that's why they're there. They're trying to get in shape. Yeah, exactly. And by the way, religion doesn't poison everything. Everything poisons religion. I poison religion because I don't live up to the pure words of Christ. But again, if I could, I wouldn't need a Savior. Also, if there is no God, tolerance is never good. Do you know if there's one thing that people who are not Christians, and particularly people in our culture, say is a virtue, is tolerance? Of course, tolerance now means celebration. We're in that month right now, as you know. Celebration. You can't just tolerate it, you have to celebrate it. But anyway, if there is no God, there's nothing good or bad, which means tolerance is never good. It's just your opinion. Now, by the way, are Christians commanded to be tolerant? Be careful. Be careful how you answer. You guys aren't answering anyway. It doesn't matter. You guys have figured this scheme out here. No, Christians are not commanded to be tolerant. Tolerance is too weak. Christians are commanded to love. You see, tolerance says hold your nose and put up with them. Love says reach out and help them. And how do you love people? Do you tolerate everything they do? You see, we have a false idea in our culture that love means approval. Love does not mean approval. Well, if you love me, you'll approve of me. No. I mean, every parent knows this. How many parents do we have in here? All right, how many former children do we have in here? Okay, good. That's everybody. Question. If your parents approved of everything you wanted to do when you were 13, would you have been a loving parent, or would your parents have been loving to you? No, you can't approve of everything your kid wants to do. That's not loving. That's enabling your kid to do evil. You need to stand in the way of evil if you're going to love somebody. You know, in the passage that everybody reads at their wedding but nobody obeys, 1 Corinthians 13, where Paul describes love, he says, love always protects. Love always perseveres. Love does not rejoice in wrongdoing. Love rejoices in the truth. You don't love people by telling them what they want to hear. You love people by telling them what they need to hear. And this is particularly the case in America today on the sex issues. We don't want to touch that issue because somebody might get mad at us. You know, Jesus gave us one new command. What's the one new command? Love one another as I have loved you. How did he love us? He sacrificed himself for us. So how are we supposed to love others? We're supposed to sacrifice ourselves for them. But you know what we wind up doing? We don't sacrifice ourselves for them. We sacrifice them for ourselves. Why don't we tell people we love the truth? Because we don't want to take their consternation. We don't want to take the blowback. We're protecting ourselves. If we truly love them, we'd take that consternation. We'd sacrifice ourselves to try and save them. In fact, Thomas Sowell, who's now 93 years old and says everything well, said this. He said, when you want to help people, you tell them the truth. When you want to help yourself, you tell them what they want to hear. Why do we tell people what they want to hear? Because we're trying to help ourselves. That's why. Finally, if there is no God, you can't complain about the problem of evil. You can't complain about injustice. You can't complain about any of that. Why? Because if there is no God, there's no such thing as evil. There's no such thing as injustice. You say, how can that be? Well, C.S. Lewis, he went through World War I, and when he came out of World War I, he said there can't be a good God. There's too much evil. There's too much injustice in the world. In fact, Lewis lost his best friend in the war. And so he said there can't be a good God. And then one day he had an epiphany, and he realized that his argument against God didn't work. And he ultimately wrote it in the book Mere Christianity. If you haven't read Mere Christianity yet, consider yourself undereducated. You need to read that book. Certainly read it before you read a book from me. Read Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. Anyway, here's what Lewis said in the book Mere Christianity, pointing out that evil requires good and good requires God. Here's what he said. He said, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how would I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You wouldn't know what a crooked line was unless you knew what a straight line was. You wouldn't know what injustice was unless you knew what justice was. Something can't be not right unless something is. You're assuming a standard, in other words, when you're claiming there's evil out there. And if you're assuming a standard, where does that standard come from? In fact, you might say, well, why can't evil exist on its own? Because evil is a lack in a good thing. It's a privation in a good thing. It's a parasite in a good thing. It doesn't exist on its own. Evil is like cancer. If you take all the cancer out of a good body, you got a better body. What happens if you take all the body out of the cancer? You got nothing. Doesn't exist on its own. Evil is like rust in a car. If you take all the rust out of a car, you got a better car. What happens if you take all the car out of the rust? You got a Pinto. Okay? It doesn't exist on its own. You could also put it this way. The shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you have to have sunshine. In other words, in order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil, but you can't have evil without good. You can't have shadows without sunshine. So if shadows exist, if evil exists, you've given proof that good exists. And if you've given proof that good exists, you've given proof that God exists. Now, I know this is going to sound counterintuitive, but it's true. Evil does not disprove God. Evil actually shows God does exist. Evil may prove there's a devil out there, but it can't disprove God, because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there was good, and there'd be no such thing as good unless God existed. Are you guys with me on this? Let me point out one other thing, if I may, for just a second. What does it mean to submit? What does that word mean? Nobody likes that word, submit. Let's take it in the context of football for a second. If I'm a diva receiver on a team and I say to the coach, you got to keep throwing me the ball, you got to keep throwing me the ball. And the coach says, look, if we keep throwing you the ball, we're not going to win. You get your chances, but we got to spread the ball around if we're going to be successful. And suppose I say to the coach, you know, coach, you're right. I'm going to submit my personal goals to the goals of the team. Would that be a good thing? Yeah. Why? Because we're all there to win, right? So I need to put my personal ambition under the goal of the team, and then I'll be a better teammate. So I'm just submitting, and the mit here, or the submission, mission is just a goal, right? You're putting yourself in service of a goal. Why is that a bad thing? Think about this, ladies and gentlemen. If there is no God, there's no right or wrong way to live life. But if there is a God, he has a mission for all of us. And we would be foolish not to subvert our own goals under his. Submission is a good thing if it comes from a benevolent source and your own creator like God. So don't buy into this idea that submission is a bad thing. Submission is actually a good thing. What's the opposite of submission? Pride. Isn't that interesting? What's the ultimate anti-God state of mind? Pride. I'm going to do things my way. Well, we'll see how that's going to work out long term. Tragically, not well. Now, what can we conclude from these three arguments? From the cosmological argument, we can conclude we have a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause. From the teleological argument, we have more information that this being is intelligent, and we see that this being is sustaining the universe. And then from the moral argument, we can see that this being is also morally good, morally perfect. Now, from these three arguments, we can conclude that we have a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause that created and sustains the universe and is moral. This is the God of biblical Christianity, and we haven't even opened the Bible yet. This is called natural theology. Everybody can know this, whether or not they have the Bible. Remember, God has revealed himself in two ways. He's revealed himself through his word, but he's also revealed himself through his works. And his works, everybody can see. In fact, if somebody were to ask you, how do you know that God exists? Here's what I think you ought to say. I know God by his effects. If there's a creation, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause, a creator. If there's design in the universe and design in you, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause, a designer. If there's a moral law written on my heart, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause, a moral lawgiver. Where do laws come from? They come from lawgivers. If there's evidence that a man predicted and accomplished his own resurrection from the dead, that's the effect. You're thinking, who could have caused somebody to predict and accomplish his own resurrection from the dead? Only somebody like God. You're always reasoning from effect back to cause, even if you think you've had some sort of personal experience with God. Say you think God has told you something, or you've had answered prayer. You're doing the same thing. You're saying the answered prayer is the effect, and the cause is God. You're always reasoning from effect back to cause. This is what scientists do. Scientists are trying to discover what caused particular effects. And so are you. Who's the ultimate cause? God is the ultimate cause. Everything else is an effect. Everything else had a beginning. Everything else needed to come into existence by something else. So I know God by his effects. Now you may be thinking to yourself, Frank, this just seems so simple. Don't atheists have arguments against this? Yeah, but they're not good. In fact, as soon as atheists begin to reason that they think Christianity or theism is false, they're going to run into a problem. And nobody pointed this out better than C.S. Lewis. I can't say it any better than C.S. Lewis, so I'm just going to read you what he wrote. Do you know most atheists today are materialists? They think everything's made of molecules, that you don't really have a mind, you just have a brain. You don't have a soul, you just have a body. You're just a molecular machine, according to them. You're just a moist robot. And here's what Lewis says about that. Check this out. That atheism makes reason itself impossible. Here's what he said. Suppose there were no intelligence behind the universe. In that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. Thought is merely the byproduct of some atoms within my skull. But if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? But if I can't trust my own thinking, of course I can't trust the arguments leading to atheism, and therefore have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I can't believe in thought, so I can never use thought to disbelieve in God. Boom. You can't say that any better. As soon as atheists open their mouths, they're stealing from God to argue against him. Why can you even reason? Because your mind is made in the image of the great mind. Because your 3-pound brain can actually figure out what's going outside of your skull, and using your senses and the laws of logic, you can make true conclusions about what goes on outside your skull. How can you do that if you're just a moist robot? You can't. Lewis is pointing out reason itself is an effect. It needs a cause. So, there's much more in the book on that, but now we got to move on to how do we know who this God is? How do we know this isn't Allah at this point? For that, we got to go to Are Miracles Possible? Now, you're probably looking at your watch going, Frank, how are we going to finish this and still have questions? Well, miracles go by very quickly. It's really easy to point this out. Because, first of all, a lot of people think miracles are impossible. Like, for example, Noah and the ark. Christians, is this being recorded? If it's not, let's just keep this between us, Christians. Can we all admit one thing? Noah and the ark is crazy! Thank you. And resurrections. I've already asked you if anyone's seen a resurrection. Nobody said yes. So how can we believe one happened in the Bible? And for some reason, the big problem miracle in the Bible is Jonah. Is that a whale of a tale or a tale of a whale? I mean, can you really believe in Jonah? Well, ladies and gentlemen, what is the greatest miracle in the Bible? No, it's not the resurrection. The greatest miracle in the Bible is... I got some of you a second time. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible. I mean, if it's true that God created the universe out of nothing, can he do whatever he wants? It's not logically impossible inside the universe? Of course. Now, here's the interesting thing. Atheists are admitting the evidence for the first verse. Now, they don't think it's God, but what else could it be? In fact, you know what Hawking's conclusion was in the last book he wrote, called The Grand Design? Here's what he says on page 180. This is a quote from a great atheist physicist. He said this: because there's a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. Hello, McFly. To which John Lennox, the brilliant mathematician from Oxford, who's also a Christian, said this: when brilliant scientists say nonsense, It's still nonsense. Gravity didn't exist, and gravity doesn't create anything. In fact, my mentor and Pastor Steve's a professor as well in seminary used to say this. In fact, we just talked about this today. Dr. Geisler used to say, I read atheists for devotions because I see how bad their arguments are. And go, that's the best you got? You're making me a lot more secure in Christianity by making up stuff like that. Look, if God can create the universe out of nothing, if Genesis 1:1 is true, can he do all these other miracles? Of course he can. Of course Noah's crazy, unless God exists. Of course resurrections can't occur unless God exists. Of course Jonah's a fairy tale unless God exists. Now, I just said something a minute ago that you might not agree with. I said God can do whatever he wants. It's not logically impossible. You probably think, I thought God can do anything. No, there's many things God can't do. He can't do logically impossible things. Like he can't create a square circle. Doesn't exist. Can't create a married bachelor. I know some guys try, but no, doesn't exist. Can't create a one-ended stick. Doesn't exist. Can't create an honest politician. You know, there's some things that are too hard for God. In fact, you can do some things God can't do. Like what? What can you do? Lie? He can't lie. He's the standard of truth. If he lied, he wouldn't be God. He can't go out of existence. He's the standard and sustainer of everything. So, yes, God is all-powerful, but he's not powerful in a way that would violate his nature, that would nullify himself. Now, a lot of people say, well, you know, I can't believe in God because I've never seen a miracle. I can't believe in miracles because I've never seen one. That's not a good reason to disbelieve something. Why? Because you believe in a lot of things you've never seen, and you believe in them. You believe in your mind. Have you ever seen it? Yeah, you're using it right now. You believe in the laws of logic and the laws of mathematics. Have you ever seen those? No, you're using them right now. You believe in justice. Have you ever seen justice? Oh, you may have seen people treated justly or unjustly, but you've never seen justice in itself because it's not something you see. It's grounded in the nature of God. It's an immaterial virtue that you act out, but you don't see. You've never seen love, and everyone believes in love. In fact, in the second debate we had with Christopher Hitchens, a student at the College of New Jersey asked Christopher this question. Christopher, what is love? And Hitchens, being a materialist, had to come up with a materialistic answer. So he finally said, love is a chemical. And I said, don't tell that to your wife. Honey, do you love me? Yeah. Why? Because I got the chemical today. You know, tomorrow I might not have the chemical. Love is not a chemical. Love is immaterial virtue grounded in the nature of God, and it's a choice to seek what's best for the other person. By the way, this is why love is not a feeling. If love was a feeling, you couldn't love your enemies. If love was a feeling, you couldn't vow to love somebody for the rest of your lives at the marriage altar. When you get married, you're not vowing to feel a certain way for the next 50 years. You can't do that. You might as well say, I'll never feel hungry again or tired again or angry. You can't vow feelings. All you can do is vow action. And by the way, this is why you need a vow in marriage. You don't need a vow when you're all lovey-dovey. You don't need a vow in the infatuation stage, you know, when your heart is beating like a hummingbird, you can't think of anything else but the other person. But that's not love. Love is seeking what's best for the other person regardless of how you feel. You need a vow after the infatuation's worn off. You need a vow when you wake up 20 years into the marriage and you go, you again. Why did it have to be you again? That's when you need a vow. You've never seen gravity. Sure we have, Frank. There's gravity right there. No, you're not seeing gravity. What are you seeing? You're seeing the effects of gravity. We really don't even know what gravity is. So you believe in a lot of things you've never seen. And by the way, if miracles do occur, and by the way, there doesn't need to be a miracle since the New Testament times for Christianity to be true. There could be no miracles since then and Christianity is still true. I think there have been. But even if there weren't, Christianity would still be true. It's not dependent on modern day miracles. But even if miracles occur today, You ought not expect to see many of them, if any. Why? Because miracles, by definition, have to be rare events. What does God use miracles for? To get our attention, to say, hey, this guy speaks for God. In fact, if you look in the Old Testament or right through the entire Bible, God is only doing miracles through people in 3 basic time periods: Moses, Elijah and Jesus and the apostles. Why? Because these people have new revelation that needs new confirmation. The new sermon needs a new sign. Why should people listen to Moses, Elijah and Jesus and the apostles? Because they can do miracles. They're being authenticated by God. But you ought not expect to see this quite a bit. If it happened all the time, they wouldn't be miracles. I mean, imagine if resurrections occurred routinely. What would the resurrection of Christ mean to us? Nothing. You go to somebody and you go, Jesus rose from the dead to prove he was God. And the guy goes, so what? Uncle George just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. Now I got to give the inheritance back. No, it's got to be a rare event. It can't be a regular event. And this is one of the things atheists don't understand. They try and treat miracles as if they're regular events. No, they're supposed to be rare events. Very rare. To get your attention. So, if Genesis 1:1 is true, and the evidence appears to show that it is, then the rest of these miracles in the Bible are at least possible. And for that, we've got to go to our final question. Did God do a miracle in the New Testament? The main miracle in the New Testament, and that is the resurrection of Jesus. Because if Jesus really rose from the dead, then Christianity's true. And if he didn't, it's false. Now, we could spend a lot of time on this. We only have limited time. We've got to go to questions. But I want to spend a little bit of time on 2 reasons the New Testament writers are telling the truth. In the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, we have a chapter called The Top 10 Reasons We Know the New Testament Writers Told the Truth. We're just going to briefly look at 2 of them. And the first one we're going to look at is embarrassing stories. What are embarrassing stories? Historians know when they look at an historical document that if the stories in it are embarrassing to the author or authors, they're probably true stories. Why? Because you're not going to lie to make yourself look bad. You might lie to make yourself look good, but you won't lie to make yourself look bad. In fact, let me ask you guys a question in here right now. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? If you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good, and it's not working. We know you're lying. All right, how many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look bad, to embarrass yourself? No, you don't do that. You might lie to make yourself look good, but you won't lie to embarrass yourself. Now, the New Testament documents are filled with embarrassing stories that make the disciples and even potentially Jesus look bad, embarrass them. That's why we call this the duh factor. They're not making this up. Let me just give you a few of them. Peter, their leader, is called Satan by Jesus. Do you think they invented this? Do you think at one point, Mark, who wrote this down, said to Peter, hey, Pete, I'm going to make this a real interesting story. I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan. What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan. Look, I'm the leader here. This doesn't look good. And then Peter says, Lord, I'll never deny you. What does he wind up doing? He denies him 3 times. And then at the crucifixion, all the disciples, maybe with the exception of one, they all run away for fear of the Jews. This is like a Monty Python movie. Run away! They all run away. And who are the brave ones? Ladies, who are the brave ones? The women. The women are the brave ones. Now, who wrote the New Testament documents down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews while the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man in here invent that? I mean, if I was writing it down, I'd make myself look good, wouldn't you? I'd write something down like this. Let's see, we marched right down there and we overpowered that elite Roman guard. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. John said, get out. Peter roundhouse kicked him. Thomas said, we'll be back. No doubt. Some of you will get that tomorrow. And then we marched right down there on Sunday morning, and we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say it was Mr. Sissy Pants hiding while the women were the brave ones. And oh, by the way, why would you never say the women were the brave ones in that culture? Forget about the fact it was embarrassing to men. It was. But independent of that, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses? Yes, because a woman's testimony was not considered on par with that of a man in that culture. So if you wanted to convince people your story was true, you'd only have the men be the witnesses. Yet all four Gospels say the women were the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They really were. Despite the fact it was embarrassing. In fact, one of them was a formerly demon-possessed woman. Gee, what a credible witness you got there. Actually, a woman came up to me once and she said, Frank, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first. I said, why? And she said, because he wanted to get the story out. I said, that is an excellent point. I had not thought of that, because ladies, when your man comes home from work, does he say much? There could have been a nuclear explosion down at the plant. He's not going to tell you. You'll see it on the news before you hear it from him. You'll be watching the news going, hey, hon, what? Oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you. Yeah. The nuke blew up. I've been hot for 3 days. What's for dinner? He's not going to tell you. In fact, I was at the University of Cincinnati in November, and some guy after the session came up to me. He said, you think that's bad? I know of a guy who was on a private plane with the pilot, and the pilot died, and he didn't know how to fly the plane. And yet, just like in the movies, the tower talked him down. He went home, and his wife said, how was your day, dear? And he said, same old, same old. I can't even believe this next verse is in the Bible, but it is. You know, Matthew 28, the Great Commission, where Jesus is giving the Great Commission, where he says, go therefore, make disciples of all nations. Notice he doesn't say make believers. He says make disciples. There's a difference. He says, as he's giving them the Great Commission, it says of the disciples there in Galilee, about Jesus, it says, some believed, but some doubted about Jesus. They're standing, he's standing resurrected right in front of them, and they're doubting it's him. It's like they're standing there going, you see that guy over there? Yep. That guy over there is Jesus. Oh, no, it can't be Jesus. He was just killed not long ago. No, I'm telling you it's him. Look, Jesus is dead. The Romans killed him. I'm telling you it's him. Do you know what the Romans did to him? I mean, they whipped him. They put a spear in his side. Blood and water came out. They nailed him to a cross. I'm telling you, Jesus is dead. If they didn't kill him, they could have been killed. I'm telling you, it's Jesus. It can't be. It is. How do you know? The women told me. They're not making this up. There's even potentially embarrassing details about Jesus in there. In Mark chapter 3, it says that Jesus' own family thought he was out of his mind and they wanted to take him home. His own family thought he was nuts. His own brothers don't believe in him. We learn later, however, that James, the half-brother of Jesus, who wrote that little book in the New Testament called James, he dies as a martyr in the city of Jerusalem. It's not even recorded in the New Testament. Josephus, the Jewish historian, records it in 62 A.D., But before Jesus rose from the dead, he didn't think his own brother was God. After Jesus appeared to him, I guess he did think he was God, and he went to his death, because of that. Now, how many people in here have a brother? All right, how many people have a brother who thinks he's God? Yeah, you don't believe in him either, right? You would need a resurrection to convince you of that. Jesus is called a madman. He's called a drunkard. He's called demon-possessed. Do you think they invented all this? He has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. And then he's got 2 prostitutes in his bloodline, the Messiah's bloodline. Now, do you think, and who are they, by the way? Does anyone know? Rahab and Tamar. Do you think Matthew, when he wrote down the genealogy, thought to himself, you know what, I really think I need to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let me put a couple of prostitutes in there. No. In fact, there's a lot of shady people in the bloodline of the Messiah. Judah, from where we get the term Jew from, Jesus from the tribe of Judah, not a good guy. This is the guy that sold his brother Joseph into slavery in Egypt, and he's the guy that slept with his daughter-in-law Tamar, who was playing a prostitute. And he's in the bloodline. David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, but he's a liar, adulterer, and a murderer. Gee, I guess there's hope for the rest of us then, huh? Bathsheba's in the bloodline. Matthew mentions her, but he won't mention her name. What does he say instead in the genealogy? Uriah's wife. Ooh. He's telling the truth. Who's Uriah? Husband of Bathsheba, whom David had killed so he could cover up the crime and have Bathsheba. But you see, Matthew's telling the truth, but it's a slam. He says Uriah's wife. And then Jesus is hung on a tree. Look, if you're hung on a tree, you're under God's curse, according to Deuteronomy 21. Well, Jesus was under God's curse. What curse? The curse of sin we put him under. But if you were making this up, you wouldn't say that. In fact, think about this for a second, ladies and gentlemen. Think about the Bible. What are the two trees in Genesis that you find in the first chapters of Genesis? Tree of life, tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Go all the way to the end of the Bible, Revelation. It's very symmetrical. What tree do you find? Tree of life, right? Actually, there's a tree in the middle. What's the tree in the middle? The tree in the middle is the tree upon which they hung Jesus. Because we sinned at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the only way we could again have access to the tree of life is if Jesus is hung on a tree himself. But if you were making this up, you would never say that. There's a lot more embarrassing stories. We got to do one more. And that is, we know that they're telling the truth because of excruciating deaths. They could have saved themselves by saying this wasn't true, but they went to their deaths anyway. Now, it's really important for you to realize that all the writers of the New Testament, with the exception of Luke, were all Jewish believers in Yahweh. Luke is the only non-Jew. He's the only Gentile. All the rest of them think they're God's chosen people. They've been slaying lambs to Yahweh for hundreds of years, thinking that their religion's true. And two things they didn't believe going in. They didn't believe a man could claim to be God. That was blasphemy. They didn't think one guy would rise from the dead in the middle of time. They'd know we'd all rise from the dead at the end of time. But they were not looking for one guy claiming to be God who would rise from the dead. Yet that's exactly what they said happened. In fact, it's really important to look at the apostles' beliefs and practices before and after the resurrection. Keep in mind, the folks that wrote this down, before the resurrection, they believed in animal sacrifice. They've been slaying lambs to Yahweh for hundreds of years. Then suddenly Jesus comes along and they go, we don't need to slay these lambs anymore because these lambs are just symbols of the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Here he is. Before they believed in a binding law of Moses. Afterwards, they say Christ's life fulfilled the binding law of Moses. Before they believed in strict monotheism. Afterwards, they believed in a Trinity, three persons in one divine essence. Yes, the Trinity is actually in the Old Testament, but it's much clearer in the New. Before they believed in the Sabbath, in fact, they thought they could be stoned for not obeying the Sabbath. After, they were believing in Sunday worship, because that's the day he rose, and they say, we don't need to obey the Sabbath anymore because the Sabbath has arrived. Who's the Sabbath? Jesus is the Sabbath. We rest in Jesus. Before, they believed in a conquering Messiah. Afterwards, they believed in a sacrificial Messiah. Before, they believed in circumcision. Afterwards, they believed in baptism and communion. Let me point out one other thing, ladies and gentlemen. What world religion would invent this as their symbol? What world religion would say, you want to be a part of our club? This is what you need to do. Nobody's inventing this. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what would have caused these people who thought they were God's chosen people to abandon everything on the left and adopt everything on the right virtually overnight? The only thing I can think of is what psychologists call an impact event. What's an impact event? An impact event is an event that is so dramatic in your life that it can turn you around 180 degrees, and despite the fact that you might not remember what you had for breakfast this morning, you'll remember an impact event that happened 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago if you're old enough. In fact, there's only a few of you that can probably answer this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you can remember where you were and what you were doing November 22nd, 1963, hold your hand up high so everyone can see it. Ladies and gentlemen, you see these people with their hands up? These people are very old. November 22nd, 1963 is my earliest memory. I was 2 years old in 2 days. Yes, I know. I'm 62 years old now. I don't look a day over 61. In fact, when I turned 50, my wife was very encouraging. She said, honey, you're going to live to be 100. I said, how do you know? She said, because you look half dead already. Anyway, I'm 2 years old in 2 days. I'm standing in the living room in our home in Wanamassa, New Jersey, and my mother is on an ottoman in front of a black and white TV, weeping uncontrollably. Mommy, what's the matter? What's the matter? They killed the president. They killed the president. President Kennedy assassinated that day. I've never seen my mom cry like that to that point. So it made an impact on me. That was over 60 years ago. I can still see my mother in my mind right now when she was 26 years old sitting on that ottoman. She's 86 now, but I can see her when she was 26. I don't remember anything before that and very little after that. Where were you when the second plane hit the tower? I was in my home near Charlotte, North Carolina. I had the TV on behind me. I'd seen the first tower had been hit. I didn't know by what. And I was talking to a pastor on the north side of Charlotte, and we were talking about what would the topic be if I came to his church and speak. And I said, do you have the TV on? He goes, yeah. I said, maybe a Cessna hit the World Trade Tower. That had happened before. Other buildings got hit by Cessnas. Maybe that was it. And so we're talking. My back is still to the TV, and suddenly the guy goes, the second tower just got hit. I turned around, I look at the TV, the second tower's on fire. I said, was it a Cessna? He goes, no, it was like a United plane. It was a passenger plane. It flew right in there. I said, you saw that? He said it was on live TV. I said, look, let me call you back. I hung up the phone, and for some reason that morning I had CNN on. The Communist News Network. And I'm not making this up, but the commentator on CNN said, one has to think there's some sort of navigational error here. I said, navigational error? You doofus. This is the clearest day in the history of the Big Apple. You don't think pilots can see where they're going? I mean, you think Stevie Wonder's flying these planes? Come on, this is terrorism. I called that pastor the next day. I said, we're going to come to your church and talk about Islam because that's what this is related to. Now, 9/11 is what? It's over 22 years ago. But those who are old enough can remember something about that day. But if I were to ask you where you were 22 days ago, most of you are going to go, I don't know, let me look at my iPhone. What was I doing 22 days ago? Why can you remember something from 22 years ago but not 22 days ago? No impact event 22 days ago. Impact event 22 years ago. Do you think if Jesus really rose from the dead, that would have been an impact event? Do you think they would have remembered everything he said and did after that? Would there be any problem? Would they ever go, gee, did he really rise? No. That's the only way I could figure out why they would have abandoned everything on the left and adopted everything on the right. It's an impact event. In fact, think about it this way. What did the New Testament writers have to gain by making up a new religion? What did they get by saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? Well, they got kicked out of the synagogue, and then they got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks, all right? In fact, they had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. I get this question, maybe you do if you're a Christian. Are there any non-Christian writers that talk about Jesus and the apostles? Yeah, they're all in chapter 9 of I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, but underneath that question, there's sort of an illicit assumption. You know what the illicit assumption is? You really can't trust the New Testament writers because you see these people were biased and they embellished it. You can only trust the non-Christian writers to figure out what really happened. Now, if you think about that for more than 5 seconds, you'll realize how stupid that is. What did these people have to gain by saying this was true? They had everything to lose by saying it was true. In fact, some of you may know my friend J. Warner Wallace, the cold case homicide detective who's been on Dateline more than any other homicide detective because he solves murders that are decades old. Well, Jim is also a Christian. He wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity, where he uses his homicide skills to investigate the greatest homicide of all time, the homicide of Jesus. And that's his website, coldcasechristianity.com. And Jim says that whenever he finds a body that he knows has been murdered, he says, I don't need to track down 1,000 motivations why that guy may have been murdered. I just need to find one or more of 3 motivations. That guy was murdered because there was either a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue. Sex, money, or power. Those are the 3 reasons that can drive people to murder. By the way, they're also the same 3 motivators that can drive any of us to sin. Why? Because sex, money, and power are good things. In fact, they're so good, we'll often take shortcuts to get them. That's what sin is. And so Jim says, if you're going to say that the New Testament writers have invented all this, then you've got to find one or more of those 3 motivators. Well, let's check it out. Ladies and gentlemen, did the New Testament writers suddenly get real popular with the ladies for saying Jesus rose from the dead? No, they didn't get sex. Did they get money? No, they weren't 21st century prosperity gospel preachers. Did they get power? No, they got the opposite of power. They got persecuted. Paul had power when he was persecuting the church. As soon as he became a Christian, he's the one persecuted. They didn't get sex. They didn't get money. They didn't get power. They're not making this up. There's no motive for it. And then why would they die for a known lie? Wait a minute, Frank. Time out. If you're going to claim that martyrdom is somehow evidence for Christianity, don't you have to say martyrdom is evidence for Islam? Because they have martyrs too. And the answer is no. Why? Well, there's a lot of differences between the Muslim martyrs of today and the New Testament martyrs of New Testament times, but let me just give you one difference for our purposes here. The Muslim martyrs haven't witnessed anything that tells them that Islam is true. They just have faith. The New Testament martyrs, on the other hand, witnessed the risen Jesus. They saw Jesus. They touched Jesus. They ate with Jesus. They verified with their own senses that Jesus had risen from the dead. Yes, some people will die for a lie they think is the truth. No one will die for a lie they know is a lie. And the New Testament martyrs were in a position to know whether it was a lie or not, and they went to their deaths anyway. Now, last thing I want to say on this, it's going to sound like heresy for a minute, but it's not. Pastor Steve, stay with me. Christianity is not true because a series of documents we call the Bible says it's true. In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible never existed. You say, how can that be? Because Christianity did not originate with a book. Christianity originated with an event, the resurrection. Do you realize there were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written? Why? Because they witnessed the resurrected Jesus, not because they read about it in a book. We tend to think, oh, if there's an error in the book, then the whole story can't be true. That's false. There would be no book if it didn't happen to begin with. In fact, we could put it this way. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. You wouldn't have documents written down in the first century by Jewish believers in Yahweh claiming a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead, unless a man really did claim to be God and really did rise from the dead, because they had no motive to make this up. Now, there are many more reasons we don't have time to get into, but they're all in the book. The overall argument is this: does truth exist? The answer is, if somebody says there's no truth, you're going to ask, is that true? 3 arguments for the existence of God. First argument, cosmological. Second argument, teleological. Third argument, moral. And from those 3 arguments, we can see we have a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created and sustains all things. Are miracles possible? The greatest miracle in the Bible is creation, Genesis 1:1. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible. Of course, if God exists, miracles are possible at any time, right? And is the New Testament telling us the truth about the resurrection? Yes, it's telling us the truth about the resurrection, and from that point, it's a short walk to point out that the entire Bible is true. Now, if you want to go further, we ran out of books, but that's okay. Take follow the cue on that QR code. And if you do that, I'm going to send you the entire PowerPoint presentation from this presentation and 5 or 6 others. The whole presentation has 362 slides, so you can spend your time thumbing through it in a PDF format. Let's end the whole thing this way. It's true. So what? So what if Christianity is true? What does it mean? Well, it means that somebody actually did die for you. Now, when I was in the Navy, I was in naval aviation, so we had to earn golden wings, which were fairly hard to earn, but there's nothing more difficult in the Navy, maybe in the military, to earn than a golden trident. That's what the SEALs wear. Very few people that start SEAL training make it through, maybe 5%. Those that do make it through and get that trident, wear that trident with pride. It is their identity. When Michael Monsoor was buried in Rosecrans Cemetery in San Diego, California, just about every Navy SEAL on the West Coast showed up for his funeral. And when they passed his casket, they took off their tridents and pressed them into his casket. They took their identity and put their identity in the one that sacrificed for them, the one that died for them. That's what we're supposed to do. Our identity is not in these fleeting temporary things that can change in a heartbeat. Our identity is in our Creator. Our identity is in the Creator who came to earth, took on human flesh, and allowed us, who tortured him, to kill him so he could take our punishment upon himself. Yet our culture says, no, don't put your identity in Jesus. Put your identity in your political party, or put your identity in your ethnic group, or put your identity in your sexual orientation or your gender identity. Ladies and gentlemen, do you realize none of those things are ultimate? Do you realize how fragile those things are? I mean, suppose you put your identity in your sexual orientation, your sexual preference. What happens when you can no longer sexually perform? You no longer have an identity? Or you're no longer sexually preferred? You no longer have an identity? What if you put your identity in another person? What happens when, God forbid, that person leaves you or dies? You no longer have an identity? You put your identity in your job. What happens when you lose your job? You no longer have an identity? No, your identity is not in these fragile, changing attributes. Your identity is in your Creator. And that's why John says, He gives you the right to become a child of God. You become an heir to the kingdom. It's an eternal identity that you can't lose. In fact, think about this, ladies and gentlemen. Everyone you love will die. Everything you build will crumble. Everything you say will be forgotten. Everything you do will come to nothing. You and your identity will die and vanish unless God exists. And thankfully, He does exist, and He came to earth and rose from the dead to show us that one day we will also rise from the dead. By the way, you know everyone's going to rise from the dead. The only question is, where are you going to go once you're risen? You're going to go be with Him, or you're going to be separated from Him? That's up to you. So what we're going to do now is go to questions. And we have microphones up here for questions. And since no one likes to ask the first question, we're moving right on to the second question. Second question, right here or right here. And great, we got a gentleman in the front row who's going to ask. Sir, what's your name?
I'm Cameron.
Say again?
Cameron.
Cameron. Hey, is there a monitor up here, back there, that you can turn up, David? Because otherwise I might have trouble hearing. No? Okay, you're just going to repeat everything he says for me. Okay, good. Go ahead, Cameron.
Is it okay if I ask 2 questions? One will be really
That's
short.
your first one.
All right, well, so 4 questions.
Okay, go ahead.
One, do you find it valuable, or I don't want to say necessary, but how valuable do you find learning another language like Greek or Hebrew to kind of understand the history and the manuscripts that were once written? Do you think that's necessary to be well-versed in apologetics?
No, it's not necessary to be well-versed in apologetics. It's the difference between watching HD TV and SD TV. Okay?
Yeah.
And I get that from my Greek professor.
Oh.
Okay? You can see more in HD, but you can still see what's going on in SD, right? Now, if you feel called to do that, it's great to have the languages. You can see more, but there are so many Greek scholars out there that we can trust. And now you have Bible software like Logos, where you don't even need to know Greek, yet you can still see what the Greek words mean and how they go together.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah. And then the other one was, so you're saying, and this is one that I actually just thought of when you were talking. You said good can exist without evil and vice versa, which I totally agree with.
Yeah.
So when God said everything's good, where was evil?
Where was evil? Well, you're asking a where question about a non-where entity.
So what happened to evil when God said everything was good?
Well, first of all, we may be reading too much into it to say all of God's creation is good. Even Satan is good in the sense that he has mind, emotion, and will. He was a good angel. Now, he uses now those good qualities for evil, but metaphysically, he's still a good being. Okay, metaphysically, meaning he has these attributes. That's why, by the way, evil is a lack in a good thing. Even Satan has to borrow qualities from God to do what he does. It's not the other way around. You can't think of a completely evil being because any being has to have good properties to even exist.
Gotcha.
All right?
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir. And then we'll come over here. We'll do that, and then we'll come over here. Go ahead. Yes, sir. Go ahead. What's your name?
Caleb.
Caleb, go ahead.
Here, give me a second. I'm looking for something. I'm making red blood cells.
No, that's fine.
My name's Caleb. I'm a Christian. I'm a fan of yours. I've been studying apologetics for a while now, and I'm using I don't have enough faith being atheist curriculum. So my question was, I've been evangelizing on a few online platforms for a while, and when I use your arguments about the beginning of the universe and the design and moral argument, when I mentioned something like supernatural, because the universe nature isn't the cause because nature is created.
Right.
But when I say that, they're like, well, how do you know it's not some aspect of nature that we haven't yet found?
Well, you can say anything you want if you're an atheist, but you have to have evidence for your position. And the best evidence we have now is that the universe itself had a beginning. And even Alexander Vilenkin, the guy I put up here earlier, who said that now there's proof that the universe had a beginning, he believes in a multiverse. He believes there are other universes out there, but you know what he says? Even if there are other universes out there, all of them together would still need a beginning. So it seems to me you don't get rid of the need for a beginner. Now, everything that is created is what we call contingent. It could not exist, and it had a beginning. There has to be something that is the uncaused first cause. Well, it could be the universe, right? The problem is all the evidence shows the universe had a beginning, so it must be something outside the universe. When atheists say, well, it could be this, it could be that, what you can say, Cameron, is you can say to them, you said Cameron, right?
No, Caleb.
Oh, you're Cameron. You're Caleb. You're Caleb?
Yeah.
All right. You can say to them, I'm going to call my friend Cameron, and he's going to help me with this. No, you're going to say to them, okay, you're saying, how do you know it's not another entity out there? Then you can say to them, how do you know it is? What evidence do you have for it? Because the evidence that we're seeing, not only from science, but the evidence from the beginning of time, is that there had to be a beginning. And the evidence from the beginning of time, I think, is even better than the evidence from science. All right?
Yeah, so there was just one more thing. So, when it comes to the moral argument, how do you answer people who are like, well, what if we just evolved and we're we're intelligent enough now to understand what right and wrong is, and dogs have, to a certain extent, can tell if something's right or wrong. That's why when you correct a dog, they'll put their head down like this because they know what they've done is wrong. It's how do you respond to people who are like, well, maybe we're just so intelligent now that it doesn't have to be a higher power, and we can just decide right and wrong for ourselves because we're that intelligent now.
The argument is not how do you know right from wrong. The argument is what is the category known as rightness. And if there is no God, then it's just one person's opinion against another. So, yeah, we could evolve and get all these sentiments, and these sentiments might tell us that we ought to do this or ought to do that, but those sentiments don't have authority over us. No mutating code has the authority to tell anyone what to do. So in philosophy, this is known as the difference between epistemology, how do you know something, and ontology, the study of the thing that you're trying to know. Let me give you an illustration of this. You could drive down the highway here, Highway 96 at 70 miles an hour, and see the sign. It says 70 miles an hour, right? And you can deny that that particular sign has an authority behind it. In other words, you could say that I can see that sign, 70 miles an hour, and I can obey it. I can drive 70 miles an hour, but there is no traffic authority, right? The problem is there would be no sign saying the speed limit was 70 miles an hour unless there was a traffic authority. See, the first is, I know it, I can see it. The second is, why does that thing exist to begin with? Because there is a traffic authority. Similarly, you can say, I know right from wrong. I know it's wrong to murder people. I know it's right to love people. And I can deny there's a God. But there would be no moral obligation to love people and not murder them unless there was a God. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so if atheism was true, then it'd be like the Autobahn. There is no speed limit. You can just go whatever you feel like, however fast you feel like.
That's right.
I don't know if you'd be able to do this. I brought my book. Could you maybe send my book?
Sure, I'll be around later. And actually, I think Pastor Steve has better penmanship, so have him do it. All right? Okay, but I got to move on over here, okay?
Okay.
All right, thanks, Caleb. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Ryan.
Hey, Ryan.
I'm a really big fan of you. You are actually the reason why I'm still a Christian.
Oh, well, thanks, brother.
So I had a question about an alleged Bible contradiction.
Uh-huh.
In 2 Kings 8:26, King Uzziah was 22 years old when he took the throne.
Mm-hmm.
But in 2 Chronicles 22, verse 2, he was 42. How do you reconcile this?
Okay, well, there's a book called The Big Book of Bible Difficulties, written by my co-author, Dr. Norman Geisler and Tom Howe. It has 800 of alleged contradictions in there. And if I remember their answer on that one, it's a scribal error, meaning it wasn't in the autograph. When we mean by the autograph, the original scroll, right? And then there are manuscripts later that people from the original scroll have copied down. And somewhere in there, an error came in by the scribe. He made an error recording 42 or 22 when it should have been the other. And that's how it got into the text. But we can figure out how old he was. I can't remember whether it's 42 or 22, but we know what his age really was. So when we say the Bible's inerrant, we're not saying every manuscript is inerrant. We're saying the original document that, say, Paul wrote the book of Romans on is inerrant. Errors may have crept in that we can detect because when we compare all the copies out there, we can figure out what the original said. But those errors that copyists have put in are not errors that we can't figure out. We can figure out what really the original said, okay? So that book will be helpful to you. It's called The Big Book of Bible Difficulties.
Thank you, Mr. Turek.
All right. Thanks, Ryan. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Zach.
Hey, Zach.
So my question is pertaining to interpretation of Scripture. So when it comes to denominations, there's so many little things that aren't necessarily issues of salvation, but
Yes.
issues of interpretation.
Yes.
My specific question is, what is the best way to understand in Scripture what should be interpreted as prescriptive versus descriptive?
Yeah, that is a great question. We have a little acronym in a class that we teach online. We teach online courses, and it's called How to Interpret Your Bible. And the acronym is STOP, S-T-O-P. Whenever you come to a passage, the first thing you got to do is stop and figure out what's going on. The S stands for what's the situation. What's going on here? Like I talked about earlier this morning about Jeremiah 29, right? Just figure out what's going on. This is a situation where exiles are being taken to Babylon. This is not a promise to us today. The T stands for what type of literature is. What type of literature is this? Is this history? Is this parable? Is this gospel? Is this law? Is it poetry? Is it prophecy? Because you're going to interpret things differently based on that type, right? The O stands for who's the object of the passage. Is this passage just for those exiles that were taken to Babylon? Or is this passage written to everybody and for everybody? And the P is what you're getting at. Is this passage prescriptive or descriptive? I would submit to you that probably a majority of the Bible is descriptive. It's not prescriptive. For example, it describes that David committed adultery with Bathsheba. That's not a prescription, that's a description. He doesn't want us to commit adultery. He's just saying this is what happened. So you've got to figure out through that acronym, STOP, what's going on. And without a specific passage, I can't tell you what the,
Right.
is there one you have in mind that you think?
So I guess generally, so what would you say? What would you say to like the Christian that says like everything out of the book Acts should happen now?
I would say that the book of Acts, the book of the activities, is mostly a description, except when the apostles are preaching about certain things that are teaching, right? Then, if Paul says get baptized, because you ought to get baptized because it's taught elsewhere too, well, okay, that's the teaching. Or Peter is quoting from one of the Psalms saying, my body will not see decay. That's what David said. And that actually turned out to be a prophecy of the Messiah. Okay, so a passage like that, okay, he's teaching. Now we can take that to the bank. But the fact that, Paul went in one direction and not another is not a description for us, or I should say a prescription for us. So much of the book of Acts is just, this is what happened during the first 30 or so years of the church, from about 33 AD to about 62 AD. So most of it is description, although there will be aspects of it that are prescriptive.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr.
All
Turek.
right, thank you. Yes, sir, go ahead.
So I had the privilege of knowing Warren as well, and the first question that I ever asked him before I annoyed him with 1,000 other ones was when arguing for classical theism, so not engaging with the Christian God necessarily with the atheist, how do you answer Plato's moral dilemma?
You mean the Euthyphro dilemma?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it becomes a false dilemma when arguing with the Christian God, but with classical theism it doesn't. So.
Well, for those of you that don't know, Euthyphro is a character in one of Plato's dialogues, which basically says, does God do it because it's good, or is it good because God does it? This is supposed to be a dilemma for Christians, because essentially what it's saying is, if God says don't murder because he's looking at a standard beyond himself, right? He's saying, oh, murder's wrong, so I'm going to tell you not to murder. Why do you need God? It's already wrong because there's a standard outside of God. Or if God is arbitrary and he just says, hey, it's wrong to murder because he just said so, you still don't need God because God's arbitrary, so you don't need God for morality. This is supposed to be the Euthyphro dilemma. But a true dilemma is not A or B, which is what the Euthyphro thing is. In other words, a true dilemma, you only have two choices. It's either A or non-A. Answer A or non-A. In the Euthyphro situation, there's a third option. God doesn't look up to a standard beyond him. If he did, then the standard is God, not him. He doesn't arbitrarily make up right and wrong. God is the standard. His nature is the standard. The standard has to stop somewhere. The buck has to stop somewhere. It stops with God himself. So the Euthyphro dilemma is what we call a false dilemma. It's not a problem for the Christian. The Christian is saying God is the standard. There's not one beyond him, and he's not arbitrary. He is. So I don't know why that creates a problem for classical apologetics.
Because within classical, you're not dealing with directly the nature of God. That's stepping into the realm of Christian apologetics.
Well, no,
theism,
I would argue that the moral law gives us evidence that God, whoever the God is a moral being. So I think that's part of classical.
I would agree with you.
Okay.
I think that they would object to that.
Well, they can object all they want. On what grounds? Yeah.
Well, that's where I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Okay. So you answered the same way Norm would.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice.
All right. Thanks. Yeah, I learned everything from him, actually. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Samuel G.
Hey, Samuel.
I just wish to address the cosmological
Sure.
argument.
Yeah. Can you get a little closer to that?
Can you hear me better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I think, I don't know the name of the fallacy off the top of my head, but it seems to me that you're saying if A, then B, so B. But if you're saying there must have been a first mover, so that must have been God, that doesn't logically follow. Because, you're saying it doesn't necessarily mean that God is B. He could be C or D or F. You can't insinuate the nature of God that way, is what I'm saying. The other thing...
Well, let me deal with that first, because I agree we don't get to the Christian God with the cosmological argument. That's what I said. We don't know if this is the God of the Bible. All we know is that this being appears to be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, and intelligent. Okay? It could be the God of the Bible, could be Allah, could be somebody else. But if you discover that Jesus has risen from the dead, which would be the ultimate authenticating miracle that Jesus speaks the truth, then the God of the Bible is the God that created the universe out of nothing. In fact, Paul says that Christ created all things in Colossians chapter 1.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, and the second part is, I'm sure you've heard of the famous violinist O.J. Simpson. Anyways, if let's put a hypothetical situation, like he's a great glove maker, he makes all these gloves. People wear them, they say, wow, they fit my fingers, each individual finger perfectly, therefore you must be the God of gloves. O.J. Simpson turns to me and says, no, that means I'm that shows the evidence of my craftsmanship. That doesn't show evidence of the nature of who I am. So that's the other facet. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, I don't know if I'm following this objection, because it seems to me that the cause can only, or let me put it another way, the cause must be greater than the effect, right? I can't give what I don't have. So if space-time and matter had a beginning, then the cause must be outside of space-time and matter, transcend space-time and matter, and have the power to create space-time and matter. All right? I don't know what you mean with the glove. I'm not following that objection. What is the...
No, it's just the complexity of the material and how it was made. If you don't understand it, that must mean it was created by God.
All we know from the teleological argument is that whoever fine-tuned the universe is extremely intelligent.
And yes, I'm approaching from a theoretically empiricist standpoint that I don't adhere to, but that I've heard objections from. It's like if you look closer and closer at something, you can get at the nature of it. So when you were using the examples with the stars, and you zoomed in on the stars, and you learned, oh, they have names. This is exactly how big they are. Therefore, that must be evidence of God. It's like, that's not evidence of God. That's evidence of a star.
All I was just showing the vastness of the universe and some of the characteristics of the universe that are fine-tuned or designed to allow us to even be here. That's all that was about. I'm not saying that Arcturus is evidence that God exists in itself, although Arcturus was created. Okay? So I'm not sure I'm following the objection.
So, no, I came under the assumption that due to your meaning by showing those examples of the gigantic proportions was that because of the complexity, therefore it shows evidence of a creator.
Well, it's not just complexity, it's design. First of all, matter itself shows evidence.
Intricate design.
Yeah. Yes. Matter itself shows evidence of a creator. Even if matter was just dead, dumb matter, it would still show evidence of a creator, because all matter is composed. And you can't go on an infinite regress of composers. You ultimately have to get back to an uncomposed composer. So whether or not matter itself is complex or simple, we might say, it still needs a creator.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Yes, sir.
Hey, Frank, how's it going?
Good. How about you? Oh, wait a minute. I got to stop right here for just a second, because it's 8:30. And those of you that have kids in childcare, if you don't go get them now, your child will be given an espresso and a puppy. Okay, you can bring them back in if you want, but if we go over with the Q&A, we don't want to overtax the people who are now trying to corral your children. All right? So, yes, sir, go ahead.
I guess this is a little bit more of like a theological question, but I grew up going to a lot of different churches. I have a lot of friends and family with different theological backgrounds, and we kind of have differences on a lot of things, from like sexuality, age of the earth, baptism. So I guess my question is for you, because one of the quotes that you had up there was like, if you love somebody, you'll tell them the truth, right? So how do we maintain unity in the church while also being honest and truthful, and like, where do you draw the lines on certain theological differences? Yeah,
because there are essentials of the faith. Like some of them are, there is a God and you are not him, right? We're fallen, we need a Savior. Jesus is God. He came to earth, added humanity to his deity, and took our punishment upon himself. And by trusting in him, you can have your sins forgiven, and Jesus will come back to judge the living and the dead, right? These are all essentials of the faith. And you're not going to deny any of those. If you do deny any of those, then you're outside of Christian orthodoxy. But we may disagree over mode of baptism. We may disagree over eschatology. We know Jesus comes back and sets all things straight, but, is it pre-trib, post-trib? Is there a rapture, all that stuff? That's not essential to the faith, okay? We may disagree on the color of the carpet, although people think that's important, all right? It's not an essential to the faith. So we can disagree over those things and still have fellowship, but we have to stay resolute on the essentials of the faith, and Paul was very resolute on that. In fact, on about 6 occasions, he names false teachers. Stay away from Alexander the metalsmith, stay away from this guy, stay away from that guy. So we have to call out false teachers, because if we're going to be shepherds, we got to shoo off the wolves. And so if it's really an essential issue, we have to divide over that. But if it's not, then we have to come together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what would you say for something like, I know you spoke a lot about abortion and pro-life, if you were engaging with a pro-choice Christian, so to speak, how would you go about navigating a conversation like that?
Okay, I would say that if you truly are a Christian and you truly do know what the scriptures say, you should be pro-life. Okay, I don't see how anybody comes to the conclusion that it's okay to kill your own children. And if we're going to say we can agree to disagree, sorry, I'm not agreeing to disagree over that. All right. Look, in 1 Corinthians 5, Paul actually expels someone from the church because he's having sex with his stepmother. Do you know there's only one person that is not allowed in the church? Anybody can come to church except this one person. Who's that one person? The person who claims to be a Christian and denies that clear sin isn't sin. That person, Paul says, expel the immoral brother in order to try and bring that person back into fellowship, to discipline the person. So if someone says clear sin isn't really sin, in order to keep the unity in the body, and in order to help that person who has this bad behavior come to his or her senses, you need to expel them from the church. I know we don't do that in 21st century America, but that's what the passage says. Because that person's just going to go to another church. Okay, fine. You're not going to stay here, though, because a little leaven leavens the whole loaf. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear.
Right. I mean, I've been navigating this a little bit difficult because I'm on your side personally, but I know some friends that, especially with the United Methodist Church, and their recent rulings, they're kind of shifting toward their more liberal, acceptance of homosexual behaviors, and so it's just been really difficult for me as a peer and a friend with a brother in Christ to be hey, I don't condone this. I don't support those.
It doesn't matter what you condone. What matters is what the scriptures condone.
Right.
And so we need to follow the scriptures even if it's painful. And when someone is saying that known sin isn't sin, they're outside the realm of orthodoxy. And Paul would kick that person out of the church for the good of the church and the good of that person. I know it's a hard teaching, but that's just the truth. And you see what happens when too many people get into a church with a certain mindset, like the United Methodist Church. It destroys the entire unity of the body. And now they're split. You have United Methodists that split off, and they're still conservative. They're still following the scriptures.
Yeah.
And then you have others that now are saying all sorts of deviant sexual behavior is just fine. Well, fine. You want to call yourself a church, but don't call it a Christian church, because it's not. Who are you, Frank, to say that? I'm just going with what the scriptures say. It's not my opinion. It's what the scriptures say. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, hello, Frank. My name is Marcus. My question is, when Jesus died on the cross for our sins, did that also include the sins of the fallen angels as well?
That's an interesting question, Marcus, because for some reason, the angels cannot be redeemed. We don't know why. But angels made their choice, and they're fixed. So the third or so that went with Satan are damned, and the 2/3 that didn't are not. And so for some reason, angels can't be redeemed. It's not explained why. In fact, to be honest, there's not a lot in the Bible about what happened with Satan. We have to read between the lines to figure that out, and much of it is speculation. So, what happened with Satan, and why is there a Satan and all that? Why is there an adversary? I mean, we can, look at certain passages and say, well, maybe that applies to Satan, but some of it's speculation.
Interesting. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Marcus. Yes, sir. What's your name?
How's it going? Austin.
Austin, go ahead.
So I believe in the Big Bang largely because of your book, which I read like years ago. My question is, how would you personally harmonize the Big Bang with Genesis 1?
So the question is, how old is the universe, essentially? How do those two go together?
Yeah, or like the Big Bang would have happened in an instant, right? But Genesis 1 says it was God made the world over 7 days. So how do you account for...
All right, well, first of all, I'm absolutely convinced the universe is at least 62 years old. It's at least 86. I'll throw my mom in there. Well, first of all, I'd ask somebody who's asking that question, what does the first verse of Genesis say? Genesis 1:1. What does it say?
In the beginning, God.
In the beginning,
God.
God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, when did God create the heavens and the earth?
Doesn't say anything.
In the beginning. Does it say when the beginning was?
No.
No. When, what do you say, what about the days? The days don't begin until verse 3. If you want to take a hyper-literal view of Genesis 1, the heavens and the earth are created. Heavens and earth is the word for universe. There was no Hebrew word for universe. Heavens and the earth refers to the universe. The heavens and the earth were created. The universe was created before the days ever began. So this is what John Lennox points out in his book, 7 Days That Divide the World. In other words, Lennox's conclusion, he teaches at Oxford, he says that Genesis leaves the age of the earth indeterminate. It doesn't tell you how old the universe is. Now, can you interpret it as young? Sure you can. Can you interpret it as old? Sure you can. But is the purpose of the text to tell us how old the universe is? In fact, some scholars are now pointing out that Genesis 1:1 is actually a polemic, or Genesis, the first chapter, is actually a polemic against the Egyptian creation story. Why? Let me back up for a second. When you read the Bible, you need to realize that the Bible was not written to you. It was written for you. Who was Genesis written to? It was written to people who had just spent 400 years in slavery in Egypt. And they're walking through the desert. They're walking through the desert. They're not asking the questions we're asking. They're not going, I wonder how old this place is. That's not their question. Their question is Yahweh the true God, or are the Egyptian gods we just came from the true gods? And the scholars are now saying that if you look at Egyptian creation stories, there are these beings that are called gods that are unexplained. They're just in the universe already. They're not outside the universe. They're like superheroes. And they are there to fight one another to bring order to chaos. And Moses comes along and he says, no, that's not the way it works. First of all, Yahweh's outside the universe. He doesn't have to fight anyone. He just speaks and he brings order to chaos. Yahweh's the true God, not these finite gods inside the universe that the Egyptians say are the true gods. So Moses is explaining to the to the Israelites who the true God is. It's not meant to be a literal 24-hour explanation so we could figure out how old the universe is. That wasn't his intention. Yep. His intention is to say Yahweh's the true God, and here's the creation story. And if you notice, it's telling an historical truth, but it appears to be telling it in a poetic way. Not Hebrew poetry, but it's got, and God said, and there's evening and morning, and there's poetic elements to it. For sure. And so to take everything in a wooden literal way, I don't think is the purpose or the right way to interpret it.
Cool.
All right?
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name's Grace.
Hey, Grace.
When talking to Catholic family members, I get hit with the question, well, we took, not me, but what I believe, we took books out of the Bible because there's 72 versus 66. How would you respond to that?
There's a book that my co-author wrote called Roman Catholics and Evangelicals, Agreements and Differences. It's by Norman Geisler and Ralph McKenzie. I'd recommend you get that book. And it goes into great detail. I think the the true explanation. It's not that Protestants took books out of the Bible. Catholics put books into the Bible in the Council of Trent, which was their response to Luther, who obviously wanted to reform the church. Now, Protestants and Catholics have been arguing this forever. Some of the books, first of all, the New Testaments of both denominations are exactly the same. It's the Old Testament where there are some works like, First and Second Maccabees and Wisdom and Tobit and these kind of books that the Roman Catholics say should be in the Bible. Now, there's controversy over this, but it appears that the New Testament characters, Jesus and the apostles, only quote from sections of the Jewish Old Testament that we have. They don't quote from Wisdom or Tobit or First or Second Maccabees, but they quote from every other section that is in the Jewish Old Testament. Secondly, the Jews didn't have these books in their Old Testament as far as we know. So why would Christians put them in our Old Testament? And most of the books are good historical information, but there are some things that contradict other things in the Bible. Like I think somewhere in Wisdom it talks about how works are necessary for justification. And also Second Maccabees talks about praying for the dead. And so there's controversy over this. And Christians and Protestants are going to argue over it. But I think the better evidence is that those books that the Catholics put in should not be in the Old Testament. They should, the books, the Protestant Old Testament is the correct one. Okay. All right?
Thank you.
Now, but given that, and it is a serious issue, but the more important issue is salvation and justification. I just had a Catholic apologist on my show. It's going to drop on Tuesday. Jimmy Aiken, very, very intelligent Roman Catholic. And he was trying to say that the Roman Catholic position on justification is the same as the Protestant position. We just use different terminology. So you may want to listen to that program. It's the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist show that'll come out this Tuesday.
Okay.
All right?
Yep. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Connor.
Yeah.
I have a question coming from a more deistic standpoint because I feel like you've answered enough about God being there in the beginning of the universe. So I've heard many times the argument of there being infinite universes, and so as crazy as it is to say that we're just here by chance, in theory, if there's infinite universes, couldn't we just happen to be in that one universe that has perfectly progressed all the way up until this point?
Even if that were the case, you need somebody to create that universe and somebody to fine-tune its creation. So you're not getting away from a fine-tuner. You're just putting it off one more step. Secondly, there's no infinite anything that's finite. Like you can't have an infinite number of universes no more than you can have an infinite number of atoms or marbles. The number of universes out there, if there are the universes, are finite. Thirdly, that the idea that chance we could just be here by chance, that still is not a cause. And when atheists say that, they are really not going with the odds-on favorite that this universe is designed. It would be like saying, let's suppose we were playing poker and you're the dealer, or let me reverse it, I'm the dealer and we're playing and I get a royal flush. Now what's the chance I'm going to get a royal flush? Like 1 in 635,000, right? And you're going to go, ooh, lucky hand. And then I keep dealing, and every time I deal, I get a royal flush. What are you going to say?
You're stacking the deck.
Yeah, you're cheating. Suppose I say, oh, no, we just happen to be in the universe where I get 10 royal flushes in a row. You're going to say what?
You're lying.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to buy that, right? And the same thing is true in this situation. We just happen to be the universe where we got this. That's not really an explanation. And that explains too much, because everything could be explained that way. Every single thing that happens could be explained because we just happen to be in the universe where this happened by chance. So it's not a real explanation. All right? And by the way, one of the main guys who does believe in the multiverse, Alexander Valenka, the guy I mentioned earlier, says, look, the whole thing needs an absolute beginning anyway.
Yeah.
So, all right?
Yep. Thank
you.
you.
All right, thanks. All right, final question. Here it is.
I snuck up on you. Sorry about that.
Yes, that's okay. Go ahead.
No, so I was listening to some of the debates on YouTube this week just to kind of prep. There was just a couple things. I think I listened to the Shermer one and one of the ones with Hitchens, and there were a couple points that were in there that I didn't feel like kind of got resolved and have just kind of been rolling around. And it has to do with the kind of young earth, old earth. I think at one point, maybe you were talking about Christ's sacrifice being retroactive.
Yeah.
And somebody said, I think the response was, well, what about the Neanderthals and Australopithecus or whatever? You know, like, is Christ's sacrifice applicable for that? And I think your response was, yes, if something or other. And so it just kind of made me think, I think historically I've been a young earth creationist, but it just kind of got me thinking.
So is the question...
I guess I wonder where you're at. Maybe I felt like I haven't quite figured out where you're at, young earth, old earth, and does it matter?
I think the evidence is better the universe is old. Okay. But I don't really care how old it is.
Yeah.
No matter how far back you go, you're going to need a creator.
Yeah,
right.
Agreed.
But I think the evidence is much stronger that the universe is old. And as I mentioned a minute ago, I don't think Genesis requires you to believe it's young. I think Genesis leaves the age of the universe indeterminate.
Okay. So there was a point in your discussion with Hitchens where he brought up that if the universe is old, why did God wait millions of years to only 6,000 years ago to reveal this, and only 2,000 years ago in a place like the Middle East, uneducated? Like, why did God wait so long? And he took these presuppositions that, you know, there were Neanderthals and all these things, and he was basing it on that. So I guess, do you
what
believe
I said
in...
was, I think people are saved prior to Jesus coming by faith in Yahweh. All right?
Yeah.
And that certainly is philosophically possible. If you just throw yourself on the mercy of the Creator, whoever that is, you can be saved.
Yeah.
In fact, Paul even says the gospel was preached to Abraham. Okay? Now, in the New Testament, it seems to say you need to know the name. Okay? So we risk all to get people the name of Jesus. We know that no matter what happens, since God is the standard of justice and is infinitely just, and he's also infinitely loving, nobody in the afterlife is going to be treated unfairly.
Okay.
Nobody's going to be treated unfairly. Just because we can't figure out who goes where all the time doesn't mean God is somehow going to be unjust. In fact, he wants people to be saved more than we do. And so we're not going to get the other side and go, man, God, you really gave that guy a raw deal.
Right.
No, that's not going to happen. So what I said was, just even in Christian history, all the way back to Abraham and before, Christ's sacrifice was retroactive to them, even though they didn't know his name.
I'm good with all of that.
Yeah.
My struggle still is, if we believe in old earth, do we believe in Neanderthals and evolution?
Well, that's a whole other question. The earth could be really old and Adam could be relatively young.
Okay.
Right? That's not the issue. And of course, for God, time doesn't matter, right? He's outside of time. So I don't take a position on who Neanderthal was or who they were. And, you know, there is evidence that apparently their DNA was mixed with human DNA. And so were they really like human beings, and how different were they? And I think the jury's out on that.
Okay. Do you have any resources on that?
Dr. William Lane Craig just wrote a book. In fact, Matt here has read it. Matt, the youth pastor, has read it. It's called The Historical Adam. You might want to start there.
What is it called?
The Historical Adam.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you. All right, Pastor Steve, come on up, Pastor. Well, this is the final one, the total final one. Go ahead.
It'll be
the
quick.
answer is no. Okay, go ahead, Pastor Steve. No.
It'll be quick. It's an easy one. So my name's Tim.
Hey, Tim.
I just wanted to get what your stance is.
Tim from Arizona, who now lives in Michigan.
You got it, man.
Yeah, okay.
You remember me. All right. So the importance and the purpose of baptism, what your stance is on that.
You know, Christians are going to argue over whether baptism is necessary for salvation. Some denominations say yes, others say no. I think the answer is no. I think it's a symbol like circumcision. And the reason for that is, I'll give the shortest answer I can. In 1 Corinthians, Paul says, I didn't come to baptize, I came to preach the gospel. That's 1 Corinthians 1. In Romans 1, Paul says that the gospel saves. So in 1 Corinthians 1, he's saying that the gospel and baptism are different. And in Romans 1, he says the gospel saves, therefore the gospel saves independent of baptism.
Okay.
It's just a sign that you are saved. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of outward expression. Of
Yeah,
your faith.
exactly.
Okay. Cool.
All right, thanks. Pastor Steve, sorry, sir. Go ahead.
Hey, thank you so much, Frank. Hasn't this been great? And I want to just thank you personally. As a pastor, I am normally here speaking. It's great to sit and be able to listen. And for me, the 2 hours and 25 minutes just flew. And so our services will be expanded. Now I know how that feels. Stop your complaining, okay, about an hour. No, the time really did fly, and the materials, it's just incredible. I think we could just go on and on listening. But I want to say Frank's been a real servant today. 3 services this morning with some of our leaders for lunch, with the Q&A, and then this tonight. And so I think just another round of applause to say thank you so much.
Thanks, Frank.
I asked Frank, yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, Steve says I'm really humble, and I am, because, I have a new book. It's called 10 Steps to Humility and How I Made It in 7. Okay? And it's really humble to me because I actually made it in 6, Steve. I don't know if you know that. But, yeah.
Well, I asked Frank if he would stay up here after the presentation and the Q&A for just a moment, because I just wanted to have a word of prayer over him. He's ministered to us so much, and we're just cheering you on as you go forward. Let's all stand together and just pray as we dismiss here this evening. Heavenly Father, we first of all acknowledge you and your goodness and your glory and the creation that we know that you have made, God, and that you have put that truth within us. It's so evident, your invisible qualities, Lord, that can be known. And we thank you for revealing yourself to us through your word. And we thank you for men like Frank Turek, who have been gifted by you to learn and to articulate in such a compelling way. And God, I pray that you would continue to bless his ministry. Protect him as he goes from here. Protect him in every way, physically, spiritually, emotionally. Continue to expand his influence for your kingdom and for your glory, Lord. I pray for each one that's been here tonight that we will take what we